are on. All right, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Good morning, Bob.
Good morning.
How are you?
I am good. I'm good. I know this wasn't planned. I just wanted to take a second for everyone to really think about what Jordan just said, right? He's a contractor like us. That's where his roots are. They created a manufacturing company for plows, yet their passion isn't just making plows and making equipment. It is advancing the industry forward. So we're all here for that reason, but I think you could hear the passion in his voice. And when possible, taking the long-term view of our industry with what Jordan said is what's going to improve us today, tomorrow, but really improve the industry so that we can all sustain. I love the word Jordan uses a lot, enduring. We want to build enduring snow businesses. So if we can all work together to help set that future standard in snow, there's no better mission than to be here in July when it's hot talking about snow than that. So I really appreciate everything Jordan, but Storm as a whole. I am honored to be even associated with you all, and up here on stage is an honor, so thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And the real question is there 31 days in July or not? The knuckle trick, right?
Yes, there is.
Okay, 31 days
There
in
is
July.
31 in July.
Thank you for that. I should have checked that before we started. I already gave an intro of myself, so I'm not going to redo that. Can you give an introduction to yourself? How did you get here? Why are you on stage today, Bob? Besides the fact that I made you.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the industry, so I'm second generation business owner. EMI was started in 1983 by my stepdad, so I used to be able to skip school so I could shovel snow all night long. I left and moved down to DC as an Audi mechanic and moved back to Pennsylvania in 2009 to learn the business. Sat in almost every role, every seat in the company, and then purchased the business in January of 2021 because in the middle of COVID, why not buy a business? And we've grown from there. So we've been a client with Storm, a partner with Storm for a long time. And as Jordan talked about, meeting new people, having conversations, I think that's where it started. I bought a VSI sprayer. We had a few conversations, and here I am today.
Love it. So the idea behind this session is, this is just how I say it. You can say it differently if you want, but I think that Storm Lawn and Snow, which is our service business, used to be Smith Lawn and Landscape, and we pulled it into the Storm branding a few years ago when we stopped landscaping, really, was the main driver for that. But I always like to say that Storm Lawn and Snow is like America's snow company, and that's not saying we're like the favorite, but I think that the way that we operate, the size that we are, the type of accounts we work on, the way we do our work is probably most comparable to a high percentage of people in this room. And we'll get into what I mean by that as we get into the meat and potatoes. To contrast that, I think Bob and his company at EMI are doing the model that's pretty sexy and big on social media, but not that many people are actually doing it. And can you tell them a little bit about how yours works?
Yeah, so we are 100% commercial industrial. So we're in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. So we are, we do the big distribution centers that people talk about all the time. We don't do route work, we don't do banks, we don't do HOAs. Where we are, our ideal clients, there are a lot of them. So we are able to really hyper-focus on zero downtime facilities, and that's where we focus.
So I think that transitioned us to our first slide pretty well. So like I said, Storm Lawn and Snow, a lot of our accounts, you can throw a baseball to from here. This commercial corridor here, it's a mix of banks and restaurants and churches and schools and strip malls. That's a lot of the type of work that we do. We do have some industrial. We do have some manufacturing, some distribution. But our biggest sites are just barely over Bob's average size site. So it's a very different Very different type of business. And to frame that up, we serve 123 unique customers at an average lot size of 1.3 acres. And sorry for those that deal in square feet. I am a Midwest guy, so everything is in acres because farm fields are in acres. He works in square feet, so we're very much on different pages, but I converted his stuff because it makes sense to me.
Thank you.
So 123 customers, 1.3 acres per site average. You have 90 customers, and your average is 8.2 acres per site. So it's like 8 times almost the sites of ours. You do have a closer number than I thought, but that's because your snow company is just way bigger than ours.
Yeah, you asked me what I thought your average would be, and some of it's just my naivety, right? Like, I grew up in the industry and we've done similar type of work, so I don't think I realized how different snow companies can be just based off the clientele, where I could not service your client successfully. And we get those calls of, hey, I've got this 20,000 square foot lot, and it's isolated from where we are. We don't do route work. We would be bad at it, and we have to explain that to clients, where if we're not dedicating equipment to a site, that's our model, we're not good at it, and we'd fail pretty miserably. So yeah, the difference is stark. 8 times the amount is a big difference.
Well, and I think part of the way I want to frame this up is like, I think there's a lot of companies that want to do the model that you do, right? They want the big sites, they want the big iron, they want to dedicate the fleet to the sites and just have people that only work on one site because it sounds great, right? It sounds easy. I'm sure you'll tell us how easy it is.
It's simple, yeah.
But that doesn't work in every market. So we're in Mankato, Minnesota. Some of you here are familiar with the market, a lot of you are not. There's maybe 2 sites in this entire city that are even big enough to dedicate fleet to. We don't have 40 acre, 50 acre, 60 acre distribution centers here. We have a giant Walmart distribution center, which is like halfway under construction still. They self-perform most of their snow. They're using a contractor to do the drive lanes and the salting, and that's it. And even that one, I think when the facility's done, I think it's like 17 acres of pavement. It's just not that big. It's a giant building, just not that much outdoor space. Fun fact, if you've seen that giant building with 90-foot sidewalls, that is a banana ripening facility. It's very interesting. That entire building is made for banana ripening. They bring in bananas, green, like dark green, and they sit in there for up to a year, and they ripen them with, I don't know, inert gases or something. So that entire building is full of bananas. So if you ate a banana this morning, it probably came from that building.
I just thought they ripened by themselves.
This was in the notes for the presentation, so I had to say it.
Oh, okay. Yes, I did not.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, I did not know there were notes, so I did not catch that.
It wasn't in the notes. I just said it now. But point being, sorry, I knew ADD would kick in once Bob got up here, but even if we wanted to do Bob's model, it doesn't exist in this market. And I think when I say that, I think I speak for a lot of you. There probably are some people here like, oh, I would love to do dedicated distribution centers and Amazon and Walmart and Prologis and all these other ones, but our markets don't support that model like Bob's market does. And obviously Bob has the advantage of being in that market, but also his company has laser focused and marketed only that. Bob could easily be doing retail and restaurants and banks in addition to zero downtime 24/7 facilities, but you've chosen to stick with your niche. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Right, and I think everybody, as you kind of said, and you know the industry better than me, it's the sexy, the big box stores, right? You're dedicating all this equipment. But we're gonna go through a lot of numbers here today that show that it's not, if it's sexy, I guess it's just because people want it, but it's not necessarily a better model, right? Just because it is available, that's what we've specialized in, and the change doesn't make sense. But when we look through these numbers, it's not the holy grail, right? A lot of storms metrics are better than EMIs. Now there's advantages to doing it, right? We have less people to do the same amount. There's less administrative costs, right? There's just less clients to deal with, which is always nice, I imagine. We might do 7 buildings for one client, so we get a phone call versus, if it's an HOA or retail, you could be getting a lot of phone calls. But we've decided to laser focus on that, and I think it's a lesson I've learned over time that saying no in a nice way is important. I touched on it earlier, but staying laser focused on what do you do best. When you're starting off, you might not be able to do that and you have to say yes to a lot of things, but as you grow and find out what is your unique value proposition, what are you special at? For us, we know what these 0 downtime facilities want. We know how to give it to them, we know what's important, and we focused on that for a long time. So, I've learned from Jordan just getting ready for this presentation, I didn't know, even for retail, it's like, well, you don't have to go out when the first flake falls. It's like we are waiting for that snow to fall. So yes, it's big box, it's big distribution centers that people are excited about, but it also means sitting in the middle of the night watching it not snow for a long amount of time, waiting for it to fall, because when it does, we have to be there to get going. So there's definitely some pros and cons, but luckily for me, I just don't know any other way.
Well, and I don't think I asked you this before when we were prepping, but are all of your facilities 24/7?
Not all.
Okay.
What we've found though is that if a facility is not 24/7 and not in a portfolio of other 24/7 facilities, they don't want to pay for our model, right? We're not doing route work, so I'm not going to dedicate this loader to 4 other buildings that also aren't open, right? We need to dedicate equipment to your site, and if you're open 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, you don't want to pay what it takes to have the equipment on site. So if it's a one-off building that's only open Monday through Friday and we give a price, they're not gonna like it, and we just don't get it. So we don't have all 24/7, but most are, and if they're not, they're normally in a portfolio where it's hired by a property manager that's managing many buildings that have the 24/7 model.
Yeah, it is a big difference compared to us. I didn't pull actual numbers, but we have a few 24/7 accounts, but most of our stuff it opens in the morning and it closes at night. And some of them are even like, they don't open until 10 a.m. It gives us a lot of flexibility, right? Of course, we stay on top of it. No, we don't just let the snow pile up and have 18 inches of snow to have to plow. We're smarter than that, but we do have more flexibility when it comes to timing on some of this stuff. Now, sometimes the timing bites us too, right? If the snow starts at 6 a.m. and everything opens at 10, all the retail opens at 10, they're all wondering why we haven't been there yet. So the snow just started falling, right?
Yep.
Whereas you're dedicated to the sites and don't necessarily have to deal with that because you're there on site working.
Yeah, I mean, that timing I think we all deal with, right? So you've been waiting for it to snow, you're ready, it snows at 7 a.m., people are just waking up. They come into their facilities and they've got snow in the way and they're wondering what you did. And it's like, well, you're waiting for snow. Our challenge is we might have cleared 4 inches overnight, but if we're getting an inch an hour, when they come in, it's still a mess. And then we get a call saying, what's going on? And you have to keep your cool and understand for clients they don't know. You send them an episode of storm chasing so they understand, but we might have cleared 4 inches overnight, yet yes, you do still have snow in your parking lot, and it's understanding what your clients expect and how to communicate the reality of what's going on.
So I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it is worth highlighting, and I think it's important for everyone to frame their mind around this, that every market has different weather, right? And that sounds like such a stupid thing to say, well, obviously every market has different weather. But if you just look at the left side of each of these tiles and look at the inches of snow, sure, there's a 40% difference there. But more drastically so, look at the number of events. So our snowfall inches are not horribly far apart, but when you look at number of events, there's a big gap there. That substantially impacts the way that you price your work, because when it snows, you dispatch. Whether it's de-icing or whether it's plowing, you dispatch. There's also a big difference in the variability between our markets. We get a lot more consistent number of events and inches of snow over the course of a 10-year period than what Bob gets in the Lehigh Valley. You want to talk about like your 3-event 7.6-inch winter, your favorite one?
No, I'd rather not. Yeah, it happens, right? I mean, you even had it a few years ago, right? Was that 3-4 years ago?
Yep.
You know, even Minnesota has it, but in the Lehigh Valley, we have pretty large standard deviation, right? So our average is 35.9 inches of snow, but we almost never get close to that, right? We're 20, we're 50 something. Even the years we hit the average, I see Mark Shannenberger here from True Weather, he'll remember the year better than me, but we had one storm and we hit our average snowfall. I think it was in January, we had 30 inches in one storm. So it looks like a normal year, yet it was the only time we plowed the entire year. We had some down years, and now we've been in a couple of years of going up, but it impacts a lot of what we do, right? Not necessarily our planning, you know, especially for what we do when we say we are, you know, guaranteed zero downtime. We have to be prepared for the big one no matter what. But as far as how we sell contracts, how we're able to sell contracts, how our clients want to buy those snow contracts, I think we'll see on some other slides. It's a challenge to sell a seasonal contract when it might go from 7 inches one year and they see what they're paying and they're not happy about that. So there's definitely some challenges with the volatility that Lehigh Valley presents.
How many people are using 10 or 15-year climatology reports to help with their pricing models and scope of work? Talk about one of those future standard things that I didn't talk about earlier. There's really good accessibility to weather data these days by zip code. So even if you're working in multiple zip codes, it matters. It makes a difference. For us at Storm Lawn and Snow, we operate in like a 8-mile radius, so not as much. But I shouldn't even say that. I guess maybe my service team, you've maybe observed at the river, there's some differences in closer to the river versus further from the river. But point being, these climatology reports will make your life so much easier because they have all the data, not just how many inches and how many events, but how many events over a certain threshold, how many events under a certain threshold, how often you get a mega blizzard over your whatever ceiling if you have a blizzard clause. Once every how many years are you going to have a bust winter? Once every how many years are you going to have a boom winter? This data could and should feed your entire pricing model, in my opinion. And this data, as far as I know, without manually mining for the data online, was not easily accessible even 5 or 10 years ago. It is now, and you guys should be using it because it is massively impactful to the way that you'll price your work, because you'll have the exact statistics on how many times you're going to drop blades, how many times you're going to sling salt or spray liquid, how many times you're going to dispatch sidewalk only, how many times you're going to deal with wind. All of this stuff has averages and has records, and of course every winter's different. There's a variability factor that matters. But when it comes to pricing snow, we should be pricing on the long-term average, because the long-term average is what always wins. And if we're doing stuff right, we're retaining accounts over a long period of time, meaning if we're pricing on the average, it's fair for the client, it's fair for the contractor in the long run.
Yeah, Jordan's nicer than me because he's Midwestern nice, Minnesota nice. I'm the East Coast guy. Like when I saw the low volume of hands that went up that use historical data, historical weather data, like it's not enough, right? If we're going to be honest with ourselves and set the future standard in snow, having the facts, that's all the climatology is. It's facts of what happens in your area is crucial. One, for yourself to base your pricing off of, but two, to educate your clients again, which I think we do not do enough of. That information, the climatology alone is worth having a weather partner. And I know it's a fun joke to complain about weather forecasts being wrong. One thing I've learned, the more I get into the weather, the more I'm amazed anyone's ever right with how many variables go into it. But having a weather partner, whoever it is, by your side leading up to a storm, and I think it's something we talked about, how much effort EMI puts into making the right call of when to dispatch, how to dispatch. I could not imagine doing it without a weather partner, and let alone the pricing. we'll get into some pricing models. You know, without it, no matter how sophisticated a spreadsheet you make, without data, it's still a gut decision. And we're dealing with too much money on the table, too much risk to be making gut decisions when the information is easily available.
Yeah. I think another thing to point out outside of just the stats that we have on the screen here is outside of the climatology reports, there is just some tribal knowledge of what local weather looks like, right? So like, because of my travels and relationships, I know that in Bob's Market, they get lower frequency, higher volume, wet, heavy snow, a lot of freezing rain and ice, a lot of trace type events that are mostly ice. You're probably just salting or liquid de-icing them off. You get nor'easters every couple of years, and when you get them, they just absolutely hammer you, right?
Yeah.
You don't get a lot of blowing snow, some, but not a lot typically, right? It tends to stay
Definitely less than the Midwest, yeah.
a lot less. If we get 54.6 inches here, we're probably plowing 100 because almost every time it snows, that snow is blowing around, right?
All right, yeah.
It's blowing off the roofs, it's blowing off the boulevards, it's blowing off the streets, whatever's not plowed. Our snow is so low moisture content and so light, and we get so much wind because it's so flat that we're plowing all the snow twice. I don't know the exact number. I don't know if anyone has the exact number. Mark, that's something for you to figure out. So how much effective snow we're plowing based on wind? Can you add that in?
Yeah.
The answer is yes, Mark.
Yeah.
The answer is yes.
I think it's probably sometimes more than double, right? We don't get drifting a lot, but when it is, we'll get a 3-4 inch snowstorm, and especially off the buildings we're doing, you know, blows one direction, there'll be a foot in the loading dock. So yeah, if you're dealing with that consistently, that's a big challenge.
And you have to know your sites too, right? Like, so I know our team does a great job of knowing that when we have a large flat roof with a certain wind exposure, we are going to just bank on the fact that we're going to have to do that south side sidewalk 4 times as many times because the snow is going to blow off the roof constantly, right? We have to budget that into our pricing. You can't just look at climatology for that. So we start off by saying you must use the climatology, and that's true. But there are also some of these other things we have to be aware of when it goes into pricing the work. Let's talk about contracts and pricing a little bit.
Want me to go?
You should go first.
Yeah, so this is what I was kind of touching on with that volatility. We don't have as many seasonal contracts in our area. And I don't know if it was, speaking with Jordan, it doesn't seem like it's just an EMI issue. It's more common in our area that most of our work is per inch. We don't really do T&M anymore. We have one contract that's T&M because it has been for a long time, but you know, they're 82% is per inch, 1% T&M, and the rest are, you know, seasonal contracts. That number is going up. I would say 7 years ago, it was all but 0. And I don't want, one thing I've learned over the past few years is it's easy to make excuses, right? It's not common in our area to have 50% seasonal contracts, and it is not, some of our clients don't even know what that is. They're so used to the model that's prevalent in our area. But what I've learned is that we did not do a good job of selling how our clients understand seasonal contracts. We are putting a lot of effort into wording it properly so that they understand the benefit, right? I've heard it compared to, well, it's like insurance, you should have it. You know, I said, the next time I go to compare myself to my insurance company is the last time, right? I don't know who talks about their insurance company in a positive way that we're gonna compare ourselves to, well, you know, you need to have us because it's insurance. Well, no one's thrilled with insurance, so I didn't want to compare that way. So as we've really honed in on why, one, just why EMI is different, but why a seasonal contract is beneficial to the clients, we've been able to sell it. So that these numbers are different. I hope to keep closing the gap from 72%, you know, from 17. I'm hoping to get to about 30 in the next 3 or 4 years. And just understanding the value proposition again for the client. And what we tell them is that it's a risk sharing model. And if they're not going to share any of that risk and we're going to be T&M or per inch pricing, EMI is holding all that financial risk. And if you're gonna make me hold all that risk, I'm gonna make a premium when it snows. I have to. Because if it doesn't snow next year, I have to put enough away that I'm fine. So we explain that there's a premium if you want to have me hold all that risk. We do, and it's been successful, but I'd rather sleep a little bit better at night and share a little bit of that risk. So even though we have a volatile market, we've said the word average a lot, and if I know the client well enough, I tell them, well, the average is an average because the average just averages, and that's why an average is an average, right? Like, say it a lot, but it's true, right? If we're in the long game and the client's in the long game and they value quality snow removal, and it's not to save 5% this year and find a new one next year to try to save 5%, if they understand why a good contractor is of value to them, and you can tell them that you will save money with a seasonal contract because the average is an average because the average averages, you can sell this work, right? They really, when it comes down to it, don't care that you're a good snow contractor and they want to make sure you're okay. They are worried about their bottom dollar. But if they understand that they have to pay a 10, 15, 20, 30% premium for us to carry all the risk, all of a sudden it starts to make sense to them.
How many people here are majority, so over 50% of your snow contracts are seasonal or guaranteed or retainer?
Nice.
Probably hits about the average. I think we pulled that average from the SIMA benchmarks thing, saying 38% of contracts in our industry are seasonal. That looked like about 30% of the room, right?
All right.
So hitting the average, that's good. I do think, and I pushed on Bob on this during our prep too, I think it's easy. I guess how many people would like to have more seasonal or guaranteed contracts? Does anyone not like them? Anyone not like seasonal? Or, okay. I feel like guaranteed money is a good thing, especially if it's up to rate margin. When we started aggressively business developing snow in this market, there was 0 seasonal contracts. Nobody. Is anyone here from Mankato? It's like total lawn here? No? They didn't show up? Dang it, Dustin. Come on. This market was no seasonal contracts. It was all T&M, literally time and materials. Like the way that the main vendors would pass out their pricing is they would have an hourly rate sheet with their equipment list. They would hand it to the customer. It had a signature line saying, I want to sign up for this season, and that was their contract. And then they would just stopwatch their hours, and they would send a bill at the end of the month, and most of the hours are made up. Like, whose line is that anyway? The games are made up and the points don't matter. Like, that's how the invoices work, right? And I remember entering that environment thinking, why are we doing all of this made up administrative work? And like, I feel like we were doing our best to be honest on our billing, but it's hard, right? If someone forgets to clock in, like, well, I know we were there, was it 4 hours, was it 5 hours? Like, take our best guess, right? And that's on us for not clocking it better, but it was a market where you had to be tracking everything, you had to be invoicing every month, and then the client just had to trust that you were telling the truth. And it just felt like a broken model to me. And I had heard about seasonal contracts through some of my networking and travels and decided to make a hard push to start getting Mankato to be a seasonal contract market. And we're now at 72% seasonal, guaranteed pay of some kind. I would guess that if there were other Mankato people here that they are probably similar because that's the way this market has shifted. And it's because of educating the clients about the mutual benefits. I agree with Bob, I don't want to compare myself to an insurance company, but what does resonate with property owners and property managers is that over the course of a 5 to 10 year period, 10's kind of a long time for them to comprehend, but 5 years they can get on board, or 3 years even can work. It all averages out. And I always tell them, we expect to be a great vendor for you. We don't expect you to need to go in a different direction. So if we have this contract together for the next 10 years, it's going to be fair for everyone. As we have evolved in our selling of seasonal contracts, we've also evolved in the way that we've sold them to make them even more fair and equitable for our clients, and I think it's something you're doing as well. But the only pushback we would get on seasonals is, well, what happens when we do get a low snow winter? Okay, that's fair. I counter that as a contractor and say, what happens when we get double our average? You gonna pay more? And the feedback I got was like, well, sure. If you give me some back when we get less, I'll give you more when you get more. So we came up with a model of a floor and a ceiling type contract. So we use the climatology data that we get, and we pick a floor that only gets hit once every 10 years, and we pick a ceiling that only gets hit twice every 10 years. So 20% of the years over 10 are going to be ceiling years, 10% of the years are going to be floor years. If we get below the floor, which for us I believe is 28 inches, is that right, Andy? 28 inches? That's right, okay. If we're below 28 inches, we give the customer a credit back. We do not give them a check back. We don't give them a discount on this year's contract. We carry it forward into the next year as a retention tool, because the most likely time to get terminated from a seasonal contract is after a low snow year. So we incentivize them not to fire us by putting their credit into the following season. And it's a substantial credit. And we actually gave out credits, I think 2 years in a row for a couple of years there. So we had a couple bad ones. But we also didn't lose any of our seasonal contracts, which we totally would have without the floor, right? We do the exact same thing with the ceiling. 3 years ago, I guess 4 years ago now, we had a 100-inch winter, which is way above our ceiling of, I believe, 77 inches. So when we hit that ceiling, we said, hey, you're going to owe us more money, but because you're reasonable with us on the floor and we carry it forward, we'll be reasonable with you and we're going to carry your ceiling forward too. Some of these businesses, especially locally owned businesses, they don't have 30 or 40 extra grand sitting in their checking account to pay excess snow bills. So what we do is we push the balance forward into the following year's contract so they can budget for it ahead of time. Is there some accounts receivable risk to that? Yes. Is there some capital timing risk of that? Yes. It's not a perfect system, but again, it's happening twice every 10 years, so we'll deal with it when it happens. And the clients find it to be extremely fair and equitable, and I think that is the idea behind an enduring arrangement with a customer, is you provide great service, you take good care of their property, you agree on what good looks like, and then you have a contract that's also extremely fair in all situations. Most of the time, 70% of the years, you're hitting within that average window, and they're paying for what they're getting, and vice versa. When you fall outside the window, you take care of them, they take care of you. And they do it in a way where the money makes sense and it works out for everyone. If you can build a structure like that, you don't give them reasons to question, as long as you're doing good work, you don't give them reasons to question if they should hire someone else. So even if they go out and get other bids, and someone does come in 80% cheaper, which does happen, they're not necessarily jumping ship because they know that what your good looks like looks good for them, and the contract is fair and equitable. So we've had extremely good success with that, which is why we didn't go from 0% seasonal to 72. The ramp looks like this. But once people get on it, they don't switch away from it because we built a structure that's fair in every situation. So what I push Bob for, and all of you, anyone who says no one does seasonals into my market, I think with proper education on what the mutual benefit is, I think any market can support seasonal contracts. To be honest, I think it's a little bit easier in a market like Minnesota where our weather variability is less than yours, but I don't think it's impossible in your market either.
No, and it goes back to what you said, before I got on stage, where you look, if it's not broken, how do we break it and fix it? Well, you did have something broken. You figured out, instead of us sitting around here and making this networking event, what can we just complain about because it's not fair? We figure, how can we make it better? And one thing I've talked about with having a weather partner is there's less standard deviation, there's less variability in my area if we go by number of events versus total snowfall, right? Because we can have some big storms, we can have some low snow years, but if we go by events, and then there's some challenges to that, but we have to get creative, but we can make it that on a seasonal contract, they're falling in that middle range, roughly that 70% of time. If we went by inches, we'd have to be 10 to 45 to keep us in there for 7 out of 10 years. But if we do number of events, there's less, the number's smaller. We're not talking about 20 to 45. We're talking 7 to 15, somewhere in that range. It hits that mark more common, and it's a smaller number that just seems less daunting to clients. And it's just getting creative. There has to be a solution-oriented mindset to make things better. And I think for a while I just kind of complained, it's per inch, it's feast or famine. Well, if we just really look at what is the issue and how do we change it, you can find a way.
So, talked about contracts, and I should have mentioned earlier, you probably saw it on the schedule, we will have Q&A. After Bob and I are done with this session, we're going to give you guys a break, and then we'll have Q&A. So any questions that are coming up during this, there is a QR code on the back of your badge. There's an app called Slido where you can submit questions. That way we don't have to walk around the room with a microphone. So feel free along the way, should have said this earlier, but feel free along the way to be submitting your questions there so that when we get to the Q&A time, we can take questions from there. If anyone has problems finding it, just put your hand up, we'll figure it out. So we talked about contracts, now let's talk about a result of where we're ending up because of those contracts. And let's talk about why there's some difference between our numbers here.
Yeah, industrial snow is so sexy, right?
Yeah.
The numbers are smaller for my company, right? So there's a lot of different reasons that go into that, but we're talking about just average per acre. I think everyone, when you have conversations around industrial snow, people love to say, oh, you just bid it at $10,000 an acre. It's there. We're close. But I can tell you when we bid $10,000 an acre on a seasonal contract, we are often the highest. And I know at a lot of these events we don't talk pricing, but I think the conversations happen anyway. And when we don't want to be honest because, it doesn't feel good to be the company with the smaller revenue per acre, right? That's not what we all want to do, right? We all want to be the best. But there's a lot of desire to do the work that we do in our area. They're just very visible sites. So there's people coming in, like Jordan said, with some low numbers, and they do get them from time to time. But yeah, so you'll see we're equivalent on per inch sites. It's about 15% higher. I think if my math is right there, not quite. We've had some below average years, but that's the goal, is that when we look at our revenue, our per inch sites on average should be 15 to 25% higher because we're carrying that risk, and that's what those numbers show.
Yeah, and we see the same thing. And I should clarify, I think the reason we queued up the discussion with weather is there is a weather factor that's playing into the difference here too, right? We should, when you're talking about per acre, per season, in a market with more snow and more events, you should be higher, right? We maybe should have done a stat of revenue per inch acre or something like that. Next time.
It might be pretty close.
Maybe next time. If you weren't so busy training for bodybuilding competition, you would have more time to prep for this.
Well, I can tell you this is the last bodybuilding I'll ever do. So
Okay,
if we're back next year, I'll be a little more coherent than I am right now.
Well, we'll see what ratings we get on the survey. If they're bad, then I'll have to pick someone else.
All right, that's fair.
Unless it's bad because of me, then I guess I'll have to pick someone else from Storm. We'll figure that out as we go. So we should be higher because we are in a higher snow environment, and on a seasonal basis, we're dropping equipment or dropping plows more often and spraying more liquid, so we should be higher. But I will also say that because we're doing a high volume of small accounts and we're routing our equipment site to site to site, and because we're using hydraulic wing plows, which are extremely efficient at what they do, they're expensive, but they're efficient, we're able to get very high throughput from our equipment. And we're able to get a pretty high per acre rate. Now, I did the math. If we were all still per push per inch, throw risk out the window, and we're just per inch or per push, and we are getting an average 54.7 inch winter, we would be more like $18,000 an acre, right? Because we're doing the same thing. When we have per inch per push sites, 28% of our sites are per inch per push, we're demanding a premium price for those because, like Bob said, we're now taking the risk on the weather instead of sharing the risk with the client. And if we're going to take the risk, we need to get the reward when it snows. I don't have an exact algorithm or equation for this, but in my head, I always thought 70-30 was the right ratio for us. 70% seasonal contracts, 30% per push per inch. And the reason I feel that way is because I do like the higher margin that comes with the per inch per push sites. And if I have 70% seasonal contracts, my overhead's covered, my equipment's covered, my people are paid, and everything else is margin, right? It's profit. So that extra 30% of per inch per push is like just higher margin additive work. Now, if I could be guaranteed to maintain or even do a little bit better than 13,780 and have 100% seasonal, I wouldn't be mad about that, but I think it is a nice balance, and I was surprised when I ran the numbers that on per inch per push sites, we're substantially higher on a per acre throughput rate than we are on our seasonals. But again, that's the way we're pricing it.
Yeah, does it make you rethink it at all?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah,
Andy,
and
what
with
do you
your, looking at these numbers, there's a lot to analyze, and just thinking with your amount of seasonal too, I guess, it makes that gap bigger, that 13 to 18. But what I've learned is that we were underpricing our per inch service. When we got the climatology and when we really worked out what does an average winter cost us, and we know if we recover our cost of equipment, we know what it costs us to do the job, where do we want our profit margins to be, and we pump out that seasonal, our per inch pricing, that's about where it was. So we were taking the risk without charging the premium. So that gap of 10.5 to 9.3 for EMI, that number should continue to get bigger. When costs go up, the seasonal costs will go up with it, just with inflation, but our price for per inch plows will go up not just because of inflation, but because we know what it takes to do the job now. So that ratio hopefully gets a little bit closer to what we see on the left side of the slide, because that's probably where it should be. There is a lot of risk there, and that's what we're working on. That the seasonal is probably about accurate where we need to be. The per inch needs to go up.
Is this including your sidewalks too, or is this just solely your?
No, this is total throughput. So this is sidewalks. This is revenue per acre. This is not just plowing. This is revenue per acre equivalent for the course of the season. So de-icing, sidewalks, plowing. So just from a global perspective, there's people from, I meant to mention this earlier, but we have people from 19 states and 2 countries here, which is really cool. Canada, US, and then 19 US states. I didn't count provinces in Canada. Sorry, Canadian guys, I'm not that sophisticated yet. But when I look across the snow belt, and I think we literally have people from Washington, which is in the northwest corner of the state, or the US, all the way up to Massachusetts, which is in the northeast corner. So across the whole thing, you always hear this $10,000 an acre, right? And I think it's just because it's a round number and it's convenient and it's probably in the middle for a lot of markets. But I think Bob is right. I think people say 10,000 an acre because it sounds good, it feels good, and the numbers probably work for most markets that get average snowfall. When I say average, I mean 25 inches to 60 inches of snow. But what I've actually seen in real life is that people say 10,000 an acre, but then they're actually working for like $6,000 to $7,000 an acre a lot of the times. And that's not just in transitional or low snow markets, that's in legitimate snow markets. I know there's people from Illinois here, but Chicago is one of those markets that just blows me away. The Arctic guys can probably speak to this a little bit, and I'm not saying they're taking this pricing, but some of the pricing I've seen out of Chicago is like, how are we working in a 35 or 40 inch snow market for that kind of pricing? The numbers don't make sense to me. But a lot of it has to do with that lack of standards, right? So there's people willing to do the work for that price, so that's the price the work's getting done for. Cleveland's another one. Todd, you probably have seen some of that from Viroscapes, right? Like, it's a lake effect market, so you get pretty inconsistent snow, but people are working for free. Minneapolis has some of it. Now there's a bunch of Minneapolis people here. There's some good priced work in Minneapolis, but there's some really bad priced work in Minneapolis too, right? So it happens in all these markets, and it all comes back to those lack of standards. And at the end of the day, it has to be the numbers that work for your business equation, for your overhead, for your equipment cost, and we'll go through some of that in a minute. But there's no reason to be taking work for break even or less. There just isn't.
We work too hard.
We
Work
work way
too
too
hard
hard.
for that.
So we kind of covered a bunch of this, Bob. But we have a little bit different mindsets on the way that we have to approach our business because of the type of portfolios that we have. And that's because, again, I don't have big sites here that we can dedicate fleet to. So the way that we build efficiency is we build routes that are as dense as possible. So we want, for the right pricing, we won't take a site just because it's next door, but for the right pricing, we want to go site to site to site to site and have as little bit of drive time between sites as possible, because when our blades are on the ground is when we're making money, right? So density is the key for us. Could we expand outside of Mankato? Sure, we could do that, but now we lose our density and our efficiency of our routing. So we have deliberately chosen to stay primarily in an 8-mile radius. We're not quite right in the middle of it, but we're not far away. If you were to take a pin close to here and go 4 miles like this, that would cover all of our sites. That's why we can get away with running an operation that plows with almost no trucks, because we're not driving 10 or 15 or 20 miles between sites. We are plowing this strip mall, and we're doing the bank next door and the restaurant next to that. We're skipping over 2 and going to the next strip mall. And that's what our routes look like. And that density is what drives our efficiency, and that density is what allows us to have expensive loaders and hydraulic wing plows and run them on 6-hour routes and just keep them going continually, right? Cycling through it. Start of the route to the end of the route, back to the beginning. During daytime events, if it's snowing during the day, we're focusing on drive lanes because these parking lots are full of cars. So we're focusing on drive lanes and sidewalks, and when the night comes and stuff closes, then we do the final cleanup. But it's all about the density, the speed, and then the utilization of the iron.
Yeah, I definitely didn't appreciate the logistical work that goes into planning that, right? When they're out selling new snow work, right? You're in a dense area, you're working in an area, thinking about that route density, and as I think through it live right now, it's like, all right, you're selling a whole bunch of work, and then you say, all right, what equipment do we have? How do we utilize that as efficiently as possible? For 99% of our work, we get a bid, and I look at one building and I'm like, all right, if we get this building, we need this machine with this plow. We also need this machine with this plow. We're gonna need 1.5 sidewalk people with 1 snow raider, and it's gonna take this much salt, right? We're selling a big enough contract that when we are bidding on something, the end result of what we have to do is just kind of there, where your route work, you're putting a puzzle together of, again, I have no idea, what is it, 6 to 12 sites, if not more, lined up to get that all together. And it's almost coming at it from 2 different directions, where when you first ask, it's like, oh, what's your throughput? When you're planning how many sites, where a machine can go, I'm like, well, it's similar. It's acreage, but it's just getting assigned somewhere. And when you talked about it, it's limiting for you in ways that you just can't go that far, right? How long? I mean, I'm sure we've all, if you've got a loader, I'm sure you've driven it further than you're supposed to. We've driven loaders pretty far, but that's not the idea. So we are able to, for the right clients, we could go an hour away, right? If the site's big enough that we can dedicate a small de-icing truck to, loader, store materials there, we can go pretty much anywhere with our model. And that's just a big difference of the route density versus what our clients want, the right clients willing to pay for that certainty, knowing they're not gonna close pretty much no matter what, right? Because if we're getting a lot of snow, it's not that, if we're getting 2 inches an hour, and what's your route time, 6 hours?
Yeah.
You get back, you're looking at 8 to 12 inches of snow during a blizzard, right? For us, we're there on site. So if we've got 2 pieces of equipment on site, worst case scenario is all we're doing is constantly keeping what they need open, but we can do that nonstop 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we need those clients that are willing to pay for it, and then if they're willing to pay for it and that setup, we can go, in theory, anywhere.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting to think about it from the standpoint of, I like the word certainty that you use. Like, your clients are paying for the certainty that the iron is there, the people are dedicated to the iron, and you're only working on their site. When people are signing up for us to plow their 0.3 acre lot, they can't pay for that certainty to have that dedicated person in iron because it would cost too much. So they're buying a fractional share of a piece of what we have to offer. And the more density we build, the more efficiency we can build, which allows us to work at a higher gross margin. Speaking of that, sorry, that's the next one actually. Labor strategy. So I think one difference, one big difference that will lead into the margin discussion, which comes next on the next slide, is when Bob and I were comparing numbers, he was like, "Oh, your margin's a lot better than mine," and we're like, "Oh, it's weird, because all our other numbers are so similar. Why is that happening?" Well, there's a pretty obvious one, and that's the fact that we don't subcontract anything. Everything is self-performed. Bob has 40% of his sites that are subcontracted.
Yep, and it's semantics. It's 40% of the square footage. It's probably actually a little bit higher. We sub out a lot of the smaller-ish sites. But yeah, when we went through a time of rapid growth where the way we were purchasing equipment and leasing equipment, we're lucky where we are in the Lehigh Valley is we have a lot of good local contractors. You know, we're working side by side. I mean, one of them's here today. You know, Jonathan Wise, we work with Jonathan Wise for a decade now. We've got, there's a reason Storks Snowplows, Storks is so successful because in that Lehigh Valley, Eastern Pennsylvania, there's a lot of quality contractors. And when Jordan talks about building relationships, EMI has those relationships because we know, you know, we're not, I don't want to get into the whole, I don't think we have time to get into the snow broker conversation. We're not a snow broker. We self-perform 60%, but we can't do it all. And being that we know what it takes to do it and the challenges and the risks, I think we're a good company to work with. So we're upfront with our clients that if we think we're going to get a new site and it's going to be subcontracted, we have this upfront conversation. It's a local contractor. There's a reason you still hire us because of our communication, our preparedness, our standards that our subcontractors meet. You know, they still work with us. But yeah, you'll see as we go along, it definitely changes the gross margin, right? We want our sub to be successful. We're not keeping 40% of the contract because we don't have private equity that we have to make sure we're hitting those margins on the back end, right? We think what we're doing is fair. I know other people have talked about it. We think owning a contract costs us somewhere between 10 and 12% just to own a snow contract. We need to recover that and make a little bit of money for everything else that goes along with it. And then hopefully we work with the right contractors that do a great job and it allows them to make some money as well. So that's part of our labor strategy. I like how Jordan put the word ideology when we talk about labor, right? We don't say labor a lot. It's the word that makes sense here. You know, we don't say it's our staff. We call frontline team members. We say team a lot. And I know it's just words and it doesn't mean a lot, but we at EMI think words do have meaning. And we put the front of our mind, you know, our frontline team members. So when we scale up from 65 to 130, we have the same people coming back year after year. Our 65 year-round people get paid much better for snow because it is challenging, right? Not that landscape's easy, but snow, it's volatile hours, it's the worst conditions you're gonna work in. So, I don't even know if we have that up here. Yeah, they start, whatever their landscape rate is, they get time and a half is their starting snow rate, minimum. And depending what their landscape position is to their snow position, it might even be more. Some people get 2x because they might be a team member on the landscape side, but a team leader on the snow side. And then we have a minimum for our team leader. So the ideology behind our teams, and I think as we talk about the differences between our companies, the reason I'm probably up here today is because the ideology about people behind EMI and behind Storm is so similar. That's probably the reason we're up here
For
today.
sure. Yeah, I think, so you have a 2x scale up for winter labor. We have a little under a 3.5x scale up for winter labor. So 3.5 times as many people that we need to perform our snow work as we do our green work. So all of our people that do our green work, unless they're hired for seasonal summer only, like college students and that kind of thing, they work in snow for us. We do the same thing as Bob. We pay a labor differential. We pay a higher hourly rate for snow than we do for green because it's less predictable hours, less desirable hours, less consistent hours. Oftentimes it's harder work. Like, there's a lot of reasons that go into why pay a labor differential for snow.
The margins are better.
The margins are better, so you can afford to, right? Wouldn't it be nice if all the services had higher margins so we could pay more? That would be a great outcome for this industry. But we're both scaling up for winter. We're both paying our people more money. You're using some subs, we're not. That's fine. You have a good reason for it, and you have very good partners that you work with. I think I know all of them actually. It is something that I think is pretty common in this industry. So how many people here run a summer team and they scale up labor in the winter? Yeah, like 90%.
Yeah.
So it's just, and there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Number one, you can't just pick away at a snow route over the course of a week like you can with a lawn care route, right? So you got to do the same route you do lawns on, but you got to do it in 4 to 6 hours in snow. So you just need more people to do the same amount of work faster. Inherently requires a scale up. Some of it's because not everyone shows up in the middle of the night, right? I think we've had pretty decent success with most of our labor, but you just need to overstaff a little bit so that when people call in sick or are on vacation or whatever the case may be, you have enough people to do the work so you can get through your routes in the appropriate amount of time, or so you have your equipment staffed. I am curious, because you're dedicating fleet to sites, do you dedicate staff to the same fleet every storm? Is it the same person and the same loader on the same site every time?
That's the plan.
What happens in real life?
I'd say, when things are going well, 90% is
Okay.
about the same. Yeah, they're assigned, and it's just a matter of who can't come in, who doesn't make it in. So we have our first line is our de-icing trucks during the storm. They're not dedicated equipment, so they're regional managers overseeing sites. They're the first ones to hop in, but very rarely are people jumping from machine to machine. If we have someone in a small loader who can run a larger loader and the operator in the larger loader can't come in, they'll move. But for the most part, maybe I'm even underselling it. It might be 95% same people, same equipment, and if they're not coming in, then we have a full-time EMI staff who's more familiar with the site than everyone else jump in.
Yep.
Do your routes change?
Try not to. We try to keep them consistent, and I would say especially on route work, there's a huge advantage to having the same people running the same sites over and over, because when you see 20 or 30 different sites, you get good at them over time, and when you switch out for someone new, they're going to be a lot slower. Even if they're a great operator, they're going to be slower just because they don't know every nook and cranny. They don't know the exact way to pull in the lot, exactly how they're going to start with the blade. It takes a little bit of time to learn that. So yeah, absolutely, whenever possible, try to keep the same people in the same machines on the same routes. And we have some people that have been doing the same stuff for us for a decade, but we've also been growing, so we have people that are brand new as well.
I think something that just dawned on me is our sidewalk work is more similar to route work, right? So you get a large industrial building, you have a 1 million square foot building. That might not be commensurate with the amount of sidewalk work there is. Sometimes it's just the short end of the building, the short end of the other building, you have some loading dock steps in between. Our sidewalk teams almost work on route work. They're jumping from building to building. And that's the reason why full-time staff leads all our sidewalk teams for that same thing where, if I hired you to run a piece of equipment, you're one of 3 on a site. I need to show you one building, the areas you're responsible for, and I can teach you that pretty quickly. But when our sidewalk teams are going to 3 or 4 different buildings, they're handling 70 different doors, and they need to know what's most important. That's probably most comparable to your overall, route work business model that our sidewalk teams are similar, and I can see the logistical challenges that brings up.
How do you, I guess, what are you using for sidewalks and how are your people transporting?
So we run Isuzu cab over trucks with open bodies on the back. So every truck has, depending on what GVW the truck is, we've gone to the NRRs that are either 17.5 or 19.5. And if that's the case, they can have a full pallet of granular material and a full tote of brine. For us in the Lehigh Valley, there's times where we need that granular power because it might be raining. We would just use too much liquid for certain events. So they have both, and then they have 2 snow raiders and anywhere from 3 to 5 people in a truck. So they're set up with that truck. Most of the Isuzus get parked inside. So even if it is snowing ahead of time, they're indoors, they can grab the truck, they can start the shift with a clean truck. But yeah, they're going around in those trucks.
Yeah, I asked it because people are always interested, because we also obviously route our sidewalk crews, and we're using enclosed trailers with snow raiders, and then we have liquid refill. We only use liquid, but liquid free refill tanks in the enclosed trailers. But the Isuzus are nice. I have seen those. Those are sweet.
Yeah, they're good.
I think we got some for this year. So gross margin. How many people can honestly say they know their gross margin in snow? Here, a few. So it's a really important number, and I will admit, especially working through the exercise with Bob, everyone calculates it a little different because it depends on what you put above and below the line in your P&L, and there's not necessarily a wrong way to do it, right? So we tried to normalize the way that we were treating equipment and cost of goods sold to even up our numbers per se. And initially Bob's like, oh, your numbers are so much better, and then we figured out it's because he's subbing some work and we're not, and really we're pretty similar.
Yep.
But I will say generally, we mentioned it earlier, but one of the great things about snow is if you're doing it right, you're doing it efficiently, you're pricing your work correctly, the margins are substantially better than most other services you're probably providing. And that's partially because it needs to be, because it's a riskier business, because we are investing in a lot of iron, we're investing in a lot of people, a lot of training, a lot of overhead, and it doesn't always snow. And not every market is getting a lot of people with seasonal contracts. So we need to get more margin so that when we have famine winters, we can survive that, right?
Yeah, I think when we looked at these numbers, if we pulled out subcontracting, we're pretty similar. And the lesson here isn't, the point of this isn't to brag about good margins, but like Jordan said, if snow's not your greatest margin service, it's one of two things. Either you're doing something else really well in another service, but it should be.
Yeah, it should be.
It's not just, oh, that's what's fair. It's like we earn it. And we have to keep that in mind when we're bidding snow and someone's bidding against you at a certain number and it's not doable. There's times the best decision is to walk away, because either A, someone else is willing to lose money on it, or work their ass off to break even, which I've done and we've all done. That's not fun. Or B, they're not going to service the client properly. And if you're building an enduring snow business like Storm talks about, you'll be there to pick up the pieces and get your price. And then they'll respect you more for it because they understand there's a reason. I mean, when you know your numbers well enough, I don't want to do this for every client, but I can show our clients why they're paying for what they're paying, right? I've got clients that require a certain type of equipment, and I can show them what the premium is, and I can show them why it's costing this much. And again, you don't want to show your numbers to everyone, but when you feel comfortable with the right client, you build a level of trust that now, especially if you're going for a seasonal and you're opening your books up a bit, there's a reason the margins are what they are, and they see the expense that you're putting in well ahead of the first snowfall. All of a sudden, there's a level of mutual respect that they understand why you do what you do.
For sure. I think when it comes to understanding pricing, profitability, and margin in snow, the most important thing to wrap your arms around, and the most complicated thing to wrap your arms around, is what your equipment costs as a percentage of revenue actually is. The reason I've seen this be a challenge for people is because you buy this iron. In some cases, it's iron that's used in the summer and in the winter, which makes it a little bit easier. But in a lot of cases, like in our snow business, most of our iron is only for winter. So the only right way to recover the cost on that iron is to recover it only through our snow contracts. Because burdening the overall overhead of the company or the green side of the business with equipment that only gets used for snow doesn't make any sense, right? And when you look at cost centers that go into performing the work that we do, heavy iron is probably going to be one of the highest percentage categories, right there along with labor, right? It's typically going to be labor. You and I looked at our labor. I thought it was going to be drastically different. I'm like, Bob, our labor is going to be so much lower than yours, and then it wasn't.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's all right. I'm over it. That's why we took the slide out. I didn't want to show it. But iron's going to be a big part of it. And I don't know that there's a perfect formula that I can tell you is the right way to recover your iron. So we're just going to talk through the way that we do it. And I would be curious in the Q&A or in networking time to hear how some of you guys approach this. So we spend all this money on iron. It doesn't matter if you're paying cash, financing. If you own the iron, you got to figure out how to recover it. The methodology that we have used at Storm Lawn and Snow to recover our iron and to price it into our contracts is we take it over the course of 7 years. We use our climatology data to know that we're putting about 200 hours a year on a loader. Some years more, some years less, but 200 is an average. That's the 200 hours, we're only considering that as mattering for knowing what our operating costs are going to be, fuel, maintenance, upkeep. Because the way that we're recovering our stuff is that we're taking the full cost of the iron, divided by 7 years, and we're recovering it completely as if there's zero residual value at the end of that 7 years. One of the biggest things that I've seen drive incorrect or low pricing on snow contracts is when people recover their iron over 5 to 7 years, but they assume a 60 or 70% residual value at the end of that time period. I'm not even going to say that you won't have that. Recent market times have showed us that residual values on 7 or 8 year old iron has been really, really good because of inflation the last 5 or 6 years. But we can't bank on that. If we're banking on that, we're banking on market conditions, and we also could have 2008 type market conditions where used iron's worth nothing. So the way we do it is we recover the entire thing over 7 years, and if there's residual value left at the end of 7 years, great. But we're not going to bank on that as part of our pricing model. How do you do yours?
We're similar. When we redid our fleet 3 years ago, our fleet had got pretty aged, pretty mismatched over the years. We purchased almost a complete new fleet, sold a fleet, purchased a fleet, which the whole purchasing, leasing, renting, all that is a whole nother long conversation that I'm still trying to figure out. But we started to try to recover on a seasonal contract the equipment in 5 years. That's what typical finance is. And when we ran the math that we're going to recover the cost of that equipment in 5 years, we're at $13,000 an acre, right? So you're at 7. We want to recover the cost of that equipment over 8 years. Then Storm takes the fuel and some other expenses, and that goes into the cost of recovering the equipment. We do it slightly different where, all right, we're going to straight line recover that equipment over 8 years, but then most of the other costs fall under cost of goods sold. So we factor, again, with the climatology, there's this many events, it averages this many hours per those events to clean up. Our big loaders are actually not that different from 200 hours. We're somewhere between 150 to 175 for our large loaders, and then about 100 to 125 for a compact, and then 75 to 100 for a skid. Mm-hmm. But when we look at all that, we factor how many hours are those machines going to be running, and that fuel gets built in then to our cost of goods sold calculation. So pretty similar. Again, we've had to true up some numbers here. There's not one right way to do it, but the lesson that I've learned over the years is you have to have a way to do this. And when you own the equipment, you know, and that's a great way to do it too, that you might have 15-year-old equipment that you love to maintain and you're good at it. And I think I overheard a story where people are buying older equipment, fixing it up, and they can even flip it for more money than they bought it for, and they use it for snow. Like, hats off, that's a great way to do it. But that equipment still costs you money, and you should still recover that expense, because one way or another, it's costing you. So just because we're gonna pay off that loader in 5 years, I'm charging the same amount in year 6, 7, and 8 for those loaders because we have to. It's costing us one way or another.
And this is, it's a complicated topic, right? It's our biggest capital expenditure. There's no set standard on how to recover it. You can argue that recovering the whole thing and assuming no residual value is wrong. You can argue that. I wouldn't even tell you you're wrong. But someone told me one time, I don't remember who it was, doesn't matter, something that really resonated with me. And what they said was, if you want to recover heavy iron properly, bill it out as if you were renting it from a rental house, because they know how to make money, right? These big established rental houses that have been around for a long time, they know how to make money. They know what it costs to own this iron long term. They know what it costs to maintain it. They know what average residual values look like over a long period of time. And the price that they spit out is based on all of those factors. And then yes, they have a margin, but we should be making a margin on everything we do, especially on the biggest investment we make, which is our capital expenditure iron. So a really simple way to look at it is, if you don't understand the recovery method or doing over 7 years, or that's complicated, look at United Rentals or look at your local CAT or Case dealer, whoever. Look at what they're charging for a seasonal rental and at least recover it at that rate. Because you know if you recover it at that rate, you're probably covering all the bases we just talked about. Now, make sure that's not like a 10-hour a month rental or something. I've seen some dumb stuff published like that, but most of them are like 50 to 200 hours type monthly rentals, which should give you plenty for snow. But if you don't want to use any other method or get complicated with math or don't understand balance sheets or capital expenditures, that's fine. Look at your local rental rates, and that's what you build into your contract. So if you're a route work guy like me, and a Case 321 can do 8.9 acres on a route, you take the fractions of that route. If it's a 0.5 acre site, it's whatever percent of that. You take that percent of what it would cost to rent it, and that's what you bill into that, or that's what you price into that pricing model, right? So it's a different way to look at it. And I thought it was a good thing. I wanted to say it because I feel like when I talk about recovering over 7 years and residual value, some people are like, whoop, I don't understand that. I think it's pretty easy to understand the idea of copying someone else's rental rate and then either dedicating it to a site like Bob and billing the whole thing to the site, or taking a fractional of it, knowing how much work it's going to do.
We've done it on the landscaping side. You know, when we were first pricing things, I'm like, I don't know, what do we charge for a chipper now? It's like, well, what are we going to put on it, blah, blah, blah. And you look at what does it cost to rent, and it works out pretty well.
It does. So you actually stole the thunder earlier when you said it, but the reason we're up here talking and the reason we've become good friends is because our ideology when it comes to culture in our businesses is incredibly similar. And we can talk about numbers and margins and pricing and contract structure, and all of that stuff does matter. But without people in our organization who have something, a mission, a purpose, a cause, and values to rally behind, that they actually believe in and want to be a part of, none of that other stuff matters. I think we'd all agree, without great people, none of us would be where we are. I certainly wouldn't. My entire career is built on great people around me. And that's because of culture. And when it comes to culture, Bob and I are quite aligned. And we won't spend a ton of time on it because Mark Bradley's going to be here this afternoon and talking about culture, building a great snow culture and a snow business. But let's just talk about some of the things we prioritize in terms of culture in our businesses.
Yeah, I mean, big picture, you know, just talk about macro of this. It's for us, and I know for Storm, it's like, it's the only reason we all do this. I mean, this is my passion, right? We looked at what makes EMI different and why do we do what we do, and You know, we have a bunch of different phrases. We call ourselves a champion of the blue-collar worker. We really we always said our mission was to build relationships through trust, integrity, and compassion. And I know I've talked to Jordan about this, where it's like, well, what's the end result, right? And for our clients, it's to improve mission-critical work environments. And when we thought about that's what we're trying to do at EMI for our clients, what we decided is EMI's whole purpose is to improve mission-critical environments. We took one word out, which is work, right? EMI exists to improve mission-critical environments, which is our clients. It's EMI itself, but it's all of our team members' houses, their homes, their families, their lives. All that is mission-critical. And when you do hard work and you ask a lot of people, there needs to be, I'm a believer, there needs to be the why behind it. So when everyone knows that EMI exists to improve mission critical environments, and then we walk the walk that it's not just for our clients, it's not so I can go buy a boat because I don't have a boat. It's really to improve the lives of everyone we deal with. It's what drives me forward, it's what drives EMI forward, and I think when you look at a company that isn't just, I've used an analogy with you, you know, we don't want to be a bottle rocket, right? They're fun, you light them, they go up really quick. They're exciting, they're loud, they go up, but they can also come down pretty quickly, right? But you look at something like a spaceship, that takes longer. The flames start coming out, it builds up, there's a lot of propulsion. You know, it doesn't just hit a button and a spaceship's in outer space. It takes a while. And when you're going to build something that's going to endure and going to go up and continue to go up and not come right back down, there has to be a greater purpose behind it. And the culture behind Storm and the culture behind EMI is what I believe is the greater purpose, right? It's not about ourselves. It's about the greater good of everybody we deal with. And you know, you can cut me off if I keep talking too long, but when I look at it as my personal mission around EMI, you know, I look at it as like a dartboard. You have that bullseye in the middle. And no matter how altruistic we all are, the most important thing is that we take care of our own families. So that bullseye is everyone's individual family, everyone at EMI, right? So whether it's me, whether it's my GM James, whether it's, you know, one of our best sidewalk team leaders, Ronaldo, his family's his bullseye. And then when you get to that next ring that I'm not a big darts guy, but I think it's 25 points, right? That's everyone else we work with. We show up every day to make sure the people we're fighting the weather with side by side can be successful as well. And you get to the next ring, it gets a little bit bigger, and that's everyone in EMI's family, right? It's 130 employees with their family, and that ring gets bigger. And then as it gets bigger there, it's our clients, and it's our vendors. And then that last ring that I've always talked about, and Jordan gave me the opportunity up here today to talk about it, that last ring covers a huge surface area, and that's our greater industry. That if we continue to push what's best for everyone, not just ourselves for today, that circle keeps getting bigger and bigger, and momentum grows and grows. So I just push all of you to figure out what your why, what drives you, and then how that can drive the people you work with, because that's all that matters, because we all work too damn hard to do this just to make $1 at the end of the day and then lose it tomorrow. This has to last. Sorry about that.
No, that's great. And I think I agree with all of that, so I won't say the same thing over. But I think it's really important for us to realize, as business owners, operators, operations managers, whatever we are, the work we do, whether it's green season or snow season, it's not the most fun work. In the snow season, you're asking your people to be on call 24/7. Doesn't matter if it's a weekend, holiday. You need them to be there. And if most of them aren't there, you're screwed and you can't run your business. And you don't retain people in that type of environment doing this type of work, in this type of heat in the summer, in the type of cold we get in the winter, by just paying them a wage. And by the way, we can't afford to match the wage of someone working at a data center, or even locally here, some of the wages they pay at even the banana ripening plant is crazy. But we can provide a culture that's a great place to work, a place people come to work where they want to spend time with people they enjoy being with, a place where they feel like they have opportunity for advancement. Everyone's definition of what their advancement or dream looks like is different, but I always say, as a leader, we need to paint a dream or vision big enough that everyone else's dream or vision fits inside of that. Because at the end of the day, people are coming to work because they need to make money. But they're coming there for themselves. And I'm not saying that means people are selfish. But people are coming to work for themselves so that they can fulfill a purpose and serve a purpose and provide for their families. And if we don't give them an environment where they feel like they can do that, where they can advance and they can move, why would they stay? And even if someone does go elsewhere for more money, if the place they go to is just attracting people because it's more money, but it's not the type of environment you can provide in your business with a great culture, they're going to come back. How many times have you guys seen it? People leave for a better pay and they come back. It happens all the time if you have a great culture. And it's probably important in every industry. I'm biased because this is the one I've been in my whole career. But building a great culture is the entire key to success in this industry, because it's what's going to allow you to retain people for a very long period of time. The longer you have people, the more tribal knowledge they have, the more they understand your business model and your purpose and where you're going, and the more that they help empower all the people around them to believe in that as well. It's extremely scalable over the long term if you can retain the same people. If you're turning over your entire staff every year, you're starting over every year. You're basically starting your company over every year, and that's a lot of work. So for those that are growing fast, you probably feel that a little bit, right? Because when you're growing fast, you're adding huge headcounts every year. And no, you're not starting over, but you're starting with a whole new cohort of people that have to get into this culture. But building, like prioritization of building a great culture will pay more dividends than anything else you can do. When I say great culture, I don't mean like pizza party or whatever. You know, people joke about the offices, Matt, throw a pizza party. Like, it's not that. And I'm not saying don't give your people food, but it's building an environment that people actually want to come to every day and that they enjoy coming to. That's what you have to do. Even when the work is hard and the work sucks, they can work together and embrace the suck together. That's the kind of environment and culture you have to build if you want to have an enduring business. And I do think, unfortunately, because it's a fairly transactional industry, part of that's because of the way property managers and property owners view us as vendors, we can often be very transactional with our teams as well. And transactional relationships are not enduring. If you build a great culture, you will have a very non-transactional culture, both with your customers and with your vendors and with your team. This is something that I see a big deviation in across the industry. Again, I said earlier, I visit a lot of companies. Some of them have absolutely amazing cultures where I would want to work, like EMI. Others I walk into and I'm like, man, how do they even stay in business? Everyone here hates it. If you have a culture where everyone hates it, figure out how to fix it real fast. Otherwise, maybe do something else. Because that's a really tough environment to, I don't even want to say to make money in, because you probably have bigger problems than that, but that's a really tough environment to be a leader in, because it's very ungratifying and it's not fulfilling. Because at the end of the day, whether you're the leader, the owner, the manager, the salesperson, you're there to fulfill a purpose for yourself. And if your purpose for yourself aligns with the purpose and vision and dream of the company, that's what's going to keep you there long term. That's what's going to get you out of bed in the morning. That's what's going to get you excited to go to work. That's what's going to get you to a point where when you go to work, you don't feel like it's work, right? That's when you know you're in a good spot. If you don't have the, what do they call it, the Monday scaries or whatever, you know, that means you're probably in a place with a good culture. And that's kind of the pulse you want to look at. So with that, we will we'll wrap up. We'll come back for Q&A in, when are we coming back for Q&A? 15, 20 minutes. Class and machine that we use in the snow industry. I always think it's funny when you talk to these Case or Caterpillar reps that don't just focus on snow, and they talk about a Cat 938 or a Case 621 as a compact. Like, that's not a compact, that's a big loader. No, that's a compact. Oh, okay. Different categories of stuff when it comes to quarries and mining and all that kind of thing. All right, let's go through a few more of these here. This is a good one. Do you think pricing has increased appropriately as technology has become more efficient? So, Arctic sectional, hydraulic wing plows, liquid de-icing. As technology has advanced and we've become more efficient in the work we do we think pricing, but that also means the equipment costs more, right? Do we think pricing has scaled with that appropriately?
I think that's one of the big issues with T&M, right? A T&M contract, if you're going to show up with a 30,000 pound loader with a 26-foot wing plow and you're trying to price against someone who's using a backhoe with a 12-foot box, no matter how you explain that to a client, that there's a reason there's a $300 difference per hour for the machine, it's difficult. But when you're pricing, the way we've always looked at it, when we increase our efficiency, it does cost money to buy those things, but I think there's the ROI is there. So I talked about redoing our fleet, whatever that was, 3 years ago. We actually reduced the size of our fleet by improving the quality of the machines and then the implements on the front, that we went from 62 pieces of heavy equipment to 50 and did the same amount of square footage. So we were able to put 12 less people burning, whatever that is, 30, 40 gallons of diesel less an hour, all the less equipment because we were more efficient. So it costs us more per piece of equipment, but the efficiency is there that I believe pays us back.
Yeah, I think it's a good answer. I do think one of the reasons that we talked a lot about gross margin, and the reason I asked how many people know their gross margin is, gross margin tells the truth, right? So if you invest in more technology or more expensive equipment or more efficiency, and your gross margin starts going down, you're probably not getting paid for that efficiency, right? So if you use that as sort of a heartbeat of your pricing, your investments should be getting recovered at the appropriate margin. And what should only happen is, even if you decide to keep gross margin the same, you should be able to scale volume and thus revenue with the same amount of equipment because the equipment's more efficient. So like, for example, easy tangible example, when we first converted our fleet from mostly fixed push boxes and truck plows to loaders with hydraulic wing plows, we went from running 24 power units down to only needing 13 power units to do the same portfolio of work, right? We invested a lot of money to get there, and we didn't actually get rid of, 12 people, 13 people and power units. We just were able to add a lot more work with the same amount of equipment as we had before because the equipment was more efficient. So as long as you keep a pulse on that gross number, that gross margin number, investments in efficiency should only allow you to scale revenue more with the same amount or less equipment.
Agreed.
Okay, I think this is a really good one. And I'm debating putting Phil on the spot. Can I put you on the spot? You want to come up? So someone, and I think it's just such an important topic, but someone asked, can you provide a better example with actual numbers of the equipment cost recovery we were talking about, and where should someone start? This is something that Phil has like really drilled into my brain too, is like, this is the most important thing for us as snow contractors to get right, is our equipment recovery, because it's the biggest investment we're making. So sorry, I didn't prep you for this at all, but basically what I was talking about earlier, if you were listening, hopefully you were.
I was a little bit.
Okay, a little bit. He was listening a little bit. We're talking about asset recovery, how we approach asset recovery and why it's so important to pricing. And can you give a real example with real numbers? If you want, I have your beautiful storm pricing spreadsheet up on my laptop if you want to use it for reference. You just have to open my laptop. All right. I hope it's actually up. I kind of made that
So
up.
we want like a a specific loader or something like that?
Yeah, like a specific example. So if you pay 200 grand for a plow and a loader combo,
Yep.
how do we recover that in our pricing? Give real examples, real numbers. And I'll get you the spreadsheet. It's right here. If I have internet.
I'm just trying to spy on the numbers.
You're gonna spy on the numbers?
I want to see these numbers.
There you go. So I don't know if that's gonna help you or not, but that's all your stuff. By the way, should introduce, this is Phil Holtz. He's our president at Storm Equipment. Talked about him earlier, but I didn't give you an official introduction. I just threw you on stage with no notice at all.
I knew it was Phil's passionate about this as well because we had a conversation, I think a year and a half ago, and Phil's one of the smartest dudes I know, and we were going back and forth, and it is such a complicated. There's no, and I said this earlier, there's no just one right answer. It's how much residual value, and that's something I'm not great at, right? Reading the market, how much residual value, and how much do you even factor that into your recovery?
Yeah, and I think maybe just principally starting there. So like, there are not many businesses where people will give the customer the future upside on their loader, so or on their equipment. Like so, as a manufacturer, if you have a resellable piece of equipment at the end of its life, you're not going to reduce the price of the widget you're selling for the customer because of that resale value. So we really can't be doing that with our loaders either. So like if your investment as a business owner in purchasing equipment, you are taking the risk on that future upside. If you don't want to take that risk, rent. If you want to take some of that risk, lease. But if you want the risk on the upside of essentially, what in snow can be, let's use a loader as an example. Loaders are meant to be used for thousands of hours per year doing dirt work. We're using it for 200 hours a year. So, we've got a 20-year useful life asset sometimes in a loader, depending on the market that it's being used in. You're going to have some resale value. You're not actually abusing that equipment enough for it to lose its value entirely. However, you're putting a ton of capital risk out there for your customer, and you feel broke because you're paying for it over 5 years. So if you're financing a loader, you're likely on a 5-year term, but it's a 20-year asset in how you're using it, which is why you feel poor until you either sell your equipment or stop growing. But you're going to accelerate that even further if you're not charging your customer for that risk that you're taking with the equipment on the site. But so a real example, let's say. So 200 hours a year. You pick how many years you want to recover over. So just pick whatever your amount of hours you're putting on a loader per year. You buy a $200,000 loader. 200 hours per year over 7 years is 1,400 hours. That's $143 an hour just for the loader. Add in your fuel per hour, maintenance, insurance per hour. You'll get your rate up to let's say the cost somewhere in the realm of like $175 an hour. And then you got to know based on your market, based on your market and your attachment, how many acres per hour you're going to get out of that piece of equipment, and then how many times you're going to have to pass through on an event to make it happen. So the way we do it is we kind of baseline off of a 2-inch event. So for us, that's like our average event in Mankato, 2-inch event. We'll say Cat 908 with a 816 wing plow on it, we'll get 4 acres per hour. And based on our climatology, we'll extrapolate how many events, how many hours we're going to be plowing. And then, you know, if you've got 4-inch events, 6-inch events, 8-inch events, you're gonna be plowing multiple times, your throughput's gonna go down. Anyways, so you forecast the amount of hours you're gonna be plowing for the year, take that rate, $175 an hour, and obviously put your operator in there, your materials as well, and then we mark it up at Storm. We try to target 35 to 50% gross margin on top of that. So let's say ultimately between cost of your loader per hour, labor, fuel, maintenance, insurance, you're at $250 an hour. If you're putting a 50% gross margin on that, you know, ultimately you're charging the customer $500 an hour. Multiply by your number of hours a season, say it's 200 hours again, so $500 an hour, 200 hours, 10,000 an hour, or 100,000 bucks a year. Like if you're using one loader on that site, it's $100,000 site.
So yeah, so I mean, and where this gets complicated and where it gets confusing is there's so many variables, right? So let's use Bob's example because it's simple because he dedicates fleet to a site. Bob buys a $210,000 package. It has a attachment and a loader. He dedicates that to a site. I know he uses 8 years, but 7's easier with $210,000 because that's $30,000 a year. $30,000 a year is his cost to own, not to operate, but to own that asset, right? And in Bob's accounting, all of his fuel, maintenance, labor is in cost of goods sold, so he's not putting that in with the loader, which is fine, it works fine. When he goes to bid an account that requires, let's just say it's really simple, it's a site that requires one $210,000 plow and loader package, that services the whole site, it lives on that site, it only works at that site. He needs to take that $30,000 a year into consideration when he does his pricing, along with all the other stuff that goes into servicing that site, the labor, the fuel, the maintenance, the materials cost. And then all of those things together, revenue minus all those things is what your gross margin ends up being, right? And then out of your gross margin comes your overhead, and that's what your net profit is at the end of that. So simple example, $210,000 package over 7 years is $30,000 a year. That's not what you bill it at. That's what it costs you just to own it and just have it sit on that site and do nothing, right? That's a really simple way to like boil it down. When you get into route work, it's more complicated, right? Because now we're allocating an asset fractionally to 12, 15, 20 different sites, but you can come up with what those fractional rates are and you just assign them. Eventually you get to a point where, like where Bob and I did on that slide, where we're like, in Bob's business, heavy iron is 18% of his revenue. So when he's bidding a site, if it's $100,000 bid, it's probably $18,000 for him to have equipment on that site. Eventually you can get to that and it gives you a better gut check. But very simply, the point to all of this is like, I think too many people think about iron in terms of what their payment to the finance company is, or what their payment was when it wasn't paid off, or once it's paid off now, it's paid off, I don't need to charge as much for it anymore. The reality is it still costs money, whether that thing's running or not. If it's sitting in your lot in the summer, there's a ticker going, dollars going down in value. Depreciation's a real thing. The other thing that confuses people is the difference between tax depreciation and real depreciation, right? Like Phil said, these are 20-year assets in our industry, maybe more, because we're putting so few hours on them. So if you take care of them and maintain them, they last a really long time if they don't rot out. If you keep them washed and clean and don't rust out, they last a long time. But we don't want to assume an asset's going to last 20 years, because more than likely over the course of 20 years, you're probably putting an engine or transmission in it. It's probably going to cost you 30, 40, 50 grand. That's really hard to budget for on short notice. If you just budget to recover the whole machine over 5, 7, 8 years, you're guaranteed to be covered, right? And that's the whole concept here, is making sure you're recovering the iron, even if you already own it. There's an opportunity cost to it, right? There's an opportunity cost to that capital. You could be taking that capital and putting it in the stock market. You can take that capital and put it in a CD. You could put it in a treasury bond, whatever. It's going to return money. You got to get a return on your assets, even if they're paid for. And that's the idea here, is what's the baseline that we should be recovering, and then what margin do we need to make on top of that to make it make sense?
And I would advocate for a 7-year industry standard for at least heavy equipment. Trucks, probably 5 years.
Yep, I agree with that. So these are the types of standards that I think, when set, make things easier for people, right? Because I think everyone does this a little bit different way, which is why I think there's like 8 questions in the Q&A about this topic, which is why I wanted to bring up an extra voice here, someone that spent a lot of time on it. If you guys get a chance to talk to Phil, he's done a lot of deep dive on this stuff. Andy from our VP from our service division as well. They've spent a lot of time on this and spent a lot of time on how to price in capital expenditures into our pricing model. And it's make or break. Honestly, for most people's pricing, it's make or break. If you don't price in your iron correctly, you're probably not making the margin you think you're making, or you're missing out on opportunity to be making more than you are, because you're not feeling like it's costing you money, but it actually is. And sometimes that cost doesn't come until the residual value is not what you thought, or until the transmission or engine goes out, or until the bottom of the market falls out and used iron's not worth as much as it was before. Those are things we can't predict. We can't build a business on gambling. If you want to gamble, go to the casino. We're not here to gamble. We're here to make money consistently, and that's how you do it. Thanks, Phil. Okay, how do I get back to the Q&A now?
Yeah, Phil.
All right, here's one for Bob. Bob, do you charge a retainer for your per-inch contracts?
Yeah, we have a retainer. We only have one T&M, and there is a retainer there. We had the one T&M contract we had. They're very demanding, rightfully so. They're a manufacturing plant; they cannot shut down. And when we started explaining the improvements to the fleet we're making and all the things that they want to stay open, and how their demand continues to go up, I tried to break down, a little bit hyperbole, where we used to plow them with 5 pieces of equipment, and now we're more efficient and there's 7 because they just cannot afford to close. The hours I would have to put on those machines to really just turn a profit on straight hours. So when we broke it down, we talk about educating the clients, it went really well, and at the end they're saying, wait, so we have a contract that is encouraging you to work slower, be less efficient, and just dump salt, and we're asking you to make less of a mess, keep us open in less time. And when they're able to put all those dots together, they're like, well, yeah, it makes sense. So they pay an equipment retainer there, and that went into that. When we looked at straight seasonal contracts, I think we're sub 10%, but we do have a lot where there's equipment retainer, where we look at seasonal as guaranteed money. We know we're going to recover on our assets, and that's where that 17% came from.
Perfect. So there's a number of questions around the same topic, so let's cover it. I'll just read one of them. How do I get to a point where I have enough top-line revenue to retain and pay people enough to keep them on all year? And how do I push through that ceiling? So essentially, how do you get to a point of having a business that supports consistent year-round staff for both green and snow operations? This is a tough one.
Yeah, the low-hanging fruit is seasonal contracts, right? That's step one, and something we talk about. We talk about with our sales department. It's that when we're all in this together and we're fighting for each other and working for each other, there's extra motivation to sell seasonal snow contracts, because it's guaranteeing year-round work for your team members. I've talked to you about this. We still seasonally lay some of our people off. We're in a volatile market. We don't have enough guaranteed income, and there are times people get laid off. And that's one of the drivers behind the seasonal snow contract. So that's probably the most obvious one to start with.
Yeah, we've tried a lot of stuff over the years. We've tried everything from guaranteed hours, where if you're on the full-time crew, you come in every day in the wintertime, whether it's snowing or not, we find something for you to do. That may or may not have led us to do some pretty crazy stuff we shouldn't have been doing, like flipping houses. That didn't work great. I think we probably lost a lot of money doing that, if I'm being honest, which is why we don't do it anymore. We tried we tried the guaranteed salary model, like, hey, we're going to pay you a flat rate through the winter, whether it snows or not. You know, we got to be careful about Department of Labor issues and underpaying people, but like, you're going to get paid this flat rate whether it snows or not, and if it snows a lot, well, you're not going to get quite as much as you're used to, but if it doesn't snow at all, you're going to get paid a lot. We happened to do that during 2 years where it didn't snow at all, so that was a lot of people got paid to go ice fishing and things like that, which was great for them, not so good for the business. So ultimately, like, this is tough, right? Bob and I talked about earlier, he has a 2x scale up for wintertime. We have an over 3x scale up for wintertime. So you're never going to have, likely, never going to have 100% of your staff that you can keep on year round. Because if you're having to scale up for snow, and I think most of the room raised their hand and said that they do, you're not going to be able to keep everyone, right? So there's going to be sort of, I call them your OGs, right? Your year-round people, your rocks, your consistent people that, you know, maybe they're your route managers, maybe they're operations managers, or your office staff, your administrative, your accounting, all those people who stay on year-round no matter what. And you try to cross-utilize those people as much as you can for your winter operations, but there's always going to be that scale-up. We're a little bit fortunate here in Minnesota where it gets so cold in the winter that other trades shut off. No one's doing concrete work in the wintertime. No one's doing asphalt. They're not typically, some guys will frame and build houses in the winter, but a lot of that shuts off. So there's a lot of labor that is laid off in the wintertime because other trades shut off, and that gives us access to labor. I know that there's other markets, there's people in this room from markets where it doesn't get cold enough, where that stuff keeps going year round. And that makes it harder to find that labor. The reality of what we do is when you have a business that requires a scale up because you have to do a lot of work in a short window of time, there's always going to be that variability where the best hope you have is that you take really good care of your part-time seasonal people so that they want to come back every year. You know, we have a number of guys that just like working with us in the winter, and every year when they get laid off from whatever it is that they do, they want to come back and plow snow for us because that's what they've done. We also have a built-in advantage where we have a broader business that does equipment and manufacturing and other things, and we're able to cross-utilize some of that labor and those resources. But I don't think there's a silver bullet here. Like, it is a scale-up business for the winter, and you got to find people. I will say, though, this is something we're pushing really hard on in our own business, is as an industry, I think we can and need to do a better job of making it a career-oriented move. I think a lot of people look at our industry, both on the green and the snow side, as a part-time job, or a temporary job, or a summer job, or something they do during college, and then they're going to go off and get a real job. We need to build businesses that are built durably enough and with good enough cultures that people want to build careers in them long term, right? So that we have those year-round people that want to be part of what it is that we do on a daily basis, instead of having it be like a temporary bridge to whatever their next thing is. And I think that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, to touch on that, an added benefit, we have a lot of certifications through SIMA at EMI. So there's a lot of advanced snow managers, CSPs, ASMs, the liquid program. And an added side benefit of that was that, you know, I did it because I wanted our people to be trained, right? I wanted us to do really good work. But what Jordan just touched on of making a career, it all of a sudden a piece of paper adds some validity to our industry, right? And we found that people who, we hand selected who went through it, but we were up to 30, I think we have 35 people who went through ASM. The retention on those people are much greater than people we don't put through the program. I think because they see this isn't just a side project, this isn't just a winter job. EMI takes this seriously. They're paying for a class that they can be a certified snow removal expert. And that's been really helpful and help paint the picture that there's more out there than just shoveling some snow.
For sure. So I think the next one ties a few of these together as well, and it's really around standard certifications programs. You mentioned at EMI you have people that are certified, probably ASM, CSP type certifications. One of the questions too is would a North American-wide association for snow help push standards? We do have the Snow and Ice Management Association, SIMA. I do think that as an industry, we need even stronger representation, and I'm not saying something different than SIMA. I'm saying something that helps grow SIMA into something more influential and more regarded and respected, not just by people in the industry, but by property owners and property managers that are procuring services from the industry. I think that's a big gap right now. If you look at other trade associations, it's on both sides. It's not just the contractors. It's the people that are hiring the contractors that are part of that as well, because they have a voice in saying what it is that they need and want and what good looks like to them. And hey, by the way, we're working together with these contractors who are also in this association to meet and set, or to help meet and set those standards as well. I think right now, if you look at SIMA, it's very much focused on the contractor. And I don't think most property owners or property managers recognize SIMA as something that's part of what they do or think about. And I'm not saying the certifications are not worth doing. I think there's great value in that. But I think if you can probably speak to it better than I can, but when you go on a property, is anyone saying we're hiring you because you're a CSP or an ASM?
No, I mean, we can leverage it, but they're not aware of what that is.
Right.
Yeah.
And awareness and participation is what's going to drive it to actually be valuable and meaningful. And that is going to require more effort than put in to date. And I'm not pointing at any individual when I say that. I'm saying as an industry, we have an association. I just don't think we've gotten enough penetration and traction with the right groups to make it totally impactful or for it to accomplish what we need to accomplish.
No, I agree, and it's something what I've learned now that we've grown as an organization and we have just more outside sales in general is I talk very internal about EMI, and even in the industry, right? It's with other contractors, and now that we have a sales department, Kim, who you've met, she's awesome, and that was her biggest push, is that we have a lot of this, right? We have these standards and we have best practices and glossary of terms that we all just talk about it with each other, and we don't educate the clients. And I've probably said this now 4 or 5 times, and we're trying to flip that. And how can we take, even if we just do it at our own level, how do we take what we've built internally, what SIMA has, what we've gotten from VSI and Boss on liquids, how do we take that and turn it to our clients and start educating one at a time, but also groups at a time? For what we do, right, there's our clients, there's all types of different organizations, right? There's IFMA, there's Traffic Association, there's BOMA, there's all these different ones, and depending where your clients live, there's some organization that they're part of. And why don't we have a seat at those tables teaching them what proper snow removal looks like, why it's important to them, and how the buying process could and should look. And we don't put in that work, right? We put in the work on how to get better ourselves, and we put a lot of time into cool equipment and all those things, but pushing out to them to educate them on what we already know is I think the next level of our industry.
And I think a lot of it comes back to us as the contractors too. We have an association in this industry, and we need to tell them what we need from them, right? And some of that comes down to us knowing what we need. I kicked off today with, we don't have a definition of what good looks like, and we need to get there so that we can know what we want and what we need. There's a lot of layers here. There's the property managers and owners. There's the associations Bob mentioned with them. There's also government and legislation, and I know SIMA's got some involvement in that. That's going to take more than a few people to get things changed there. Changing of liability and insurance laws could shift this entire industry overnight. Of course, changing legislation doesn't happen overnight. It takes a decade or more, right? For those of you from the Northeast who might be familiar, there's a state, New Hampshire, has a green contractor program. It's really cool legislation. It basically says if you're a contractor that follows best practices and you do things the right way and you document things the right way, your liability is limited. It gets rid of the inherent desire to just oversalt and overapply, de-icer for the sake of not getting sued for a slip and fall, because it says if you do it properly to the scientifically necessary levels, and you document all of it, and you train your staff correctly, and you stay certified in this program, and you get sued for a slip and fall, the state of New Hampshire is saying, actually, you have everything documented correctly, you're not going to be held liable for that. And in a lot of states, you would be. That changes the way that we can run our business, because now we're not scared of that liability and that litigation. So some of this is at a government level too. It's going to be a lot easier for a trade association to lobby for change when it comes to legislation than it is for a private contractor, because we have profits interests and the trade association doesn't, right? So I think that's something we need to keep pushing on as well, is that there's a legislative side that is behind these two, and insurance. Insurance and government, it's all, in my mind, tied together and creates the same group of issues. All right. For contractors in areas that seasonal contracts are not commonly used, what is one tip that would help improve success implementing these types of contracts?
I guess that would be for me.
It'd be for both of us. You can go first, though.
We touched on it earlier, right? It's we talk about this for team members, for clients, whatever, and it's like, it always comes down to what's in it for me, right? So what's in it for the clients? Why, if you can put yourself in their shoes, why would they want to buy it, right? It's what it comes down to. No one's in this for charity, so there has to be an advantage for the buyer to want to do that. And I don't really, without just repeating myself, educating the client, right? And I don't want to keep saying it, but I think that's where we're missing all of this. That they don't know what they don't know, right? If they've hired different contractors and all it is an RFP with a T&M rate and that's the contract, they don't know any different. There's no one, when someone comes into managing a property, there's no playbook on how to buy snow removal, right? They don't know any different, and until there's legislation around it that makes it, which I don't think we want the legislation to be the guide for all of it, it's incumbent upon us to have our ducks in a row that explain this and open up their eyes to what it actually takes and what the advantage of hiring a good contractor at a fair price and what's in it for them.
And I think just kind of back to a little bit of what I said earlier is when we started selling seasonal contracts in this market, there weren't any. And it was just showing on paper why it made sense for both parties. And why it makes sense for a property owner or property manager is that over the course of the long term, the seasonal contract is priced based on a long-term average of weather. Meaning that they're gonna pay, on average, the same amount over the long term in a seasonal model as they would on a per inch or per push. The pricing is based on those numbers, and you have to show them that. And show them that, you can even model it for them. Take the last 5 years and show them how your seasonal pricing ends up equaling out to your per push price. Actually, you can show them the per push pricing is a little bit higher because you're taking the risk. You can educate them on that too. Say, hey, we'll do per push, but you're paying a 15 or 20 or 25% premium because now I'm taking the risk if it doesn't snow instead of you. But also, by the way, we have these great contract structures with a floor and a ceiling that protect you in a low snow year and it protects us in a high snow year, and it all averages out over the course of 10 years. It doesn't resonate with all of them, but if you can have a simple illustration, even going into a meeting, just have a simple illustration showing the last 5 years or the last 10 years or whatever you want. Really easy to put together in Excel. Even easier with AI. Go in Claude or ChatGPT. Say, here's my climatology report. Here's my price per acre on average. Make a chart on this I can show to a property manager. It'll spit out something pretty good, really fast. If you can illustrate to them why it makes sense financially, not just the fact that they're going to pay basically the same amount or less than they would on T&M or per push, but also the fact that it's stable and they can budget stably for it instead of having peaks and valleys, it does resonate with a lot of them. It's how we've sold most of ours, is just showing the math. Because Bob's right, and I said it earlier too, these property managers are busy. Snow is an inconvenience, it's a hassle, they don't want to deal with it. They all hope it doesn't snow. That's really what they want is, gosh, hopefully this doesn't snow this year. I still think that's the reason some of them wait till snow's in the forecast or till it's on the ground to hire a snow contractor. Because in some markets, maybe they'll get lucky and it won't snow this year. Not in Minnesota, but there's markets in the mid-Atlantic and on the ice belt where you might get a year without snow. So maybe they just hope it's not going to snow. We have to educate them on what it looks like long term and what a good partnership looks like and the value of a good partnership. And maybe it doesn't resonate the first year, but you bring back the information the second year, it starts to click. The third year, maybe they get nailed with a huge T&M year. They're like, wow, that contract sure would have been nice. Would have been a really nice year to have that contract with these 3 nor'easters we had, or with these 2 blizzards we had, or with this 100-inch winter we had. And all of a sudden it's going to click. And what I have seen is that once you get them in that structure, they don't tend to go back. And if they were going to go back, it's because of a low snow year. But if you have that credit add back for the following year, that helps bridge that gap. Someone had also asked the question, what is our give back percentage? It's not a flat percentage. We basically have a dollars per acre per inch, and it's a credit that gets given back based on the size of the site. I think it essentially ends up being somewhere, depending on, let's say we were 10 inches below the floor, they'd end up getting like a 20% credit back. So it's pretty substantial. But also if we're 10 inches under our floor, which is way under our average, our cost of goods sold into servicing those accounts was a lot lower, and we can justify that. It makes sense on paper for us to do that, and it helps us retain the accounts.
We looked at the same thing where basically if it didn't snow at all, what's the maximum we could give back if we did nothing, right? So we know we need to recover this much. What's realistic we're going to do, build in some profit, and we kind of know, hey, this is the realistic minimum we'll ever service in a year. This is what it's going to cost us. Here's our margins that we want, and that shows how low we could possibly go. And same thing, it's a scale on how much we give back, on how far down it goes.